So stress is not a bad thing. It calls us to act, it energizes us, it allows us to prepare. And, we develop strategies to deal with stress, right? So we know exactly what we need to talk about to make sure that that court case is actually successful. But then we also want to kind of regroup and then allow ourselves to decompress from that really stressful environment so that we're then aptly prepared for the next case.
All right. Hello, and welcome back to the Partnership Connections podcast. This podcast is centered around child welfare training and educational topics, all with the goal of helping to support those already working in or with an interest in working in child welfare. My name is Stan Brazier, and I'm the project director for the Learning Partnership between the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, and Rhode Island College. Our desire with this podcast is to bring information from experts on a variety of topics, all at no cost to hardworking professionals and others. Please note a quick disclaimer that the thoughts and opinions expressed by both the guests and hosts of this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the institutions or agencies that they might represent. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about neuroscience. We talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences and trauma impacting the brain, but how much of us are really thinking about our own neurology as an adult and as a child welfare professional? There are so many factors to consider, such as technology, social media, and the general demands of everyday life and work. So today, our guests are here to offer some insight and support into helping child welfare employees and other helping professionals that are working in high-stress work environments better understand what might be happening to them neurologically and what they can do about it. And we'll also look to talk about how we can better understand and decipher the neurological changes that may be impacting the kids and families that they work with, especially those impacted by trauma, substance use, and mental health issues. So typically I do a quick bio for each of our guests, but I'm going to turn it to them. Our guests are Dr. Kristin Scaplen and Dr. Victoria Heimer-McGinn. And I'm going to start by asking each of them to tell us a little bit about themselves and what aspects of their personal journey led to their interest in neuroscience.
Hi, Stan. Thanks for having us. My name is Dr. Victoria Heimer-McGinn. I am a neuroscientist who specializes in learning and memory. So I currently study cognition in bipolar disorder using a preclinical model. I have a lot of experience in many different fields within neuroscience, including things having to do with the molecules in your brain, so molecular neuroscience, as well as behavioral neuroscience, and also electrophysiology, which is the study of how neurons, which are the cells in your body, actually communicate with each other. I got into neuroscience, as many people do. I always say that all roads lead to neuroscience. Anything that you study mildly related to the brain. This can be chemistry, biology, computer science, anything. At some point, you're going to get some problem that's big enough, that's related to the brain, that will make you, do a 360 and say, wait, I want to be a neuroscientist. So for me, it was partly that kind of just excitement, like academic excitement about the brain, but it's also personal for me. So I have a lot of mental illness in my family. My uncle has schizophrenia, and it's always been kind of like a presence in my life of just wondering what's happening, in my uncle's brain, what's happening in all of our brains, because all of us have a little bit of something at some point in our lives. And so the quest has really been at a very personal level. What is our brain? How does it make us behave the way that we do? And what happens when something goes wrong?
So the personal and the academic really kind of come together for you. And it sounds like you really look at the brain as sort of the center of your universe in a way, right?
A little bit. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Awesome. So Kristin Scaplen, I am also a neuroscientist. I'm also a professor of neuroscience at Bryant University and an adjunct professor of neuroscience at Brown University. So my kind of days are split between research and teaching. In the lab, I'm really interested in how our brains change with experience. I'm especially interested in memories, right? And why are some memories so incredibly strong and some memories are maybe not as strong, right? We can talk about that within the context of disease. PTSD, we have individuals who are struggling with really intrusive memories. So why are those memories really, really strong? And then we also have individuals suffering from Alzheimer's disease who are desperate to hold on to those memories, and yet they can't. You can also talk about that within the context of your own life, right? You probably remember what you did yesterday with your family or maybe at work, but perhaps what you ate for dinner 2 months ago, not really something that you can draw upon. And memory is, in fact, what got me interested in neuroscience. So it was in the classroom when I was, in fact, an undergraduate, where I learned about patients like HM who had parts of their brain removed, memory centers, to deal with things like seizures and epilepsy, where you have these neurons that are firing almost too excited, right? And so the idea is like remove this part of this brain region, right, to reduce that excitation and help these individuals lead better lives. But a shocking side effect is he was no longer able to form new memories. So that really, really fascinated me. How do our brains kind of create memories for experiences, and how do we draw upon those memories to shape our future behavior?
Yeah, that's fascinating to me too, because I really want to get into like what, even for our own personal lives, right? Like you said, what makes a memory that much stronger or not as strong for us? What about that is an indicator that, what was the sort of the rationale behind that? I think is pretty interesting. So I'd love to be able to get into that a little bit more. But I wanted to try to start by addressing and supporting our child welfare workforce. Obviously, we have a focus on Rhode Island, but anybody could listen to this. Child welfare is obviously a pretty high stress work environment. So maybe you could both kind of give us a little bit of insight into what's going on sort of neurologically. And I wanted to kind of maybe also present a little bit of a case scenario. So this might be something that you might come across with if you're a child welfare frontline worker, especially, right? Like how you might use your brain or nervous system to tackle a challenging day. So you're getting thrown a lot of different things at you, right? Like you didn't get a good night's sleep, you're running late, you need to close 2 cases and get ready for court all before 10 a.m. It's 8:30. You've got 5 minutes to yourself. What might be happening neurologically, and what are some evidence-based strategies or practices that that individual or anyone can use to support their own neurological health and I think more importantly, even neurological like resilience in a high stress work environment when a lot's coming at them.
Yeah. So a lot is happening in your brain when you are under chronic stress. The scenario that you described is a scenario that a lot of people suffer from, right? You have a stressful day, you didn't sleep, you didn't eat well, you haven't exercised, you probably haven't gotten in contact with your friends and family for a while or really had time to enjoy their presence. And so what happens? You come into work, you lose concentration, you sometimes have this kind of on edge feeling or agitation, and that is obviously going to affect your work. So why does that happen? A couple of things are, I think, the major causes of these symptoms that I'm talking about. There are 3 areas of your brain that really help you go about your daily life in a way that is cognitively fit with your environment. One of these areas is the area that Dr. Scaplen mentioned in her introduction, the part of the brain that was removed in a patient before we knew that part actually had anything to do with memory. And it's called the hippocampus. You've probably heard about it if you are the type of person who listens to podcasts having to do with the brain. The hippocampus is really responsible for forming new memories, and it's also responsible for navigation, for allowing you to navigate the world, right? Has anyone ever been in a situation where, you come out to a parking lot and you're like, where's my car? It's a couple of different memories suffering in that scenario, but your ability to navigate through a space is also the hippocampus. So the hippocampus, when you're under chronic stress, has reduced volume. And so in that reduction of volume, it can happen for a couple of reasons. It can happen because you lose cells in that part of your brain. It can happen because you lose some of the processes that allow your cells to communicate more effectively. And so all these things are going to affect your memory throughout the day. Another area of the brain that's very highly affected when you are under stress is the amygdala. People might have heard about the amygdala. This is the part of your brain that processes very strong emotions. And it's actually also involved in memory, especially when there are memories that have really high valence of emotion. And this part of your brain becomes overactive, right? And so this is related to things like you might start ruminating more, you might start worrying, you might start being agitated. That's your amygdala being overactive. And then you have your prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that is also spoken about a lot. And the prefrontal cortex is a part of your brain that basically does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is it coordinates other areas of your brain in order to have these executive functions that that you need throughout your day to day in order to function. And the prefrontal cortex, I guess to put it very simply, it becomes less effective. So sometimes it's overactive, sometimes it's underactive, depending on the area. But overall, it becomes less effective in being able to manage your emotions, to manage your anxiety and your restlessness. So all in all, that makes the perfect storm for burnout, basically.
Yeah. I might add, I think I like to think about chronic stress as keeping your brain in this kind of state where it is listening for threats and it's preparing to respond to threats, right? Just like Dr. Heimer-McGinn was talking about the amygdala being overactive, right? What happens when that's happening, right? You can imagine if you have this, I'm always listening for threats. I'm always preparing to respond. This part of my brain is really, really overactive. It's very reminiscent actually of a computer, right? You can imagine you have your computer with multiple programs opening. They're all open. They're all running at the same time. That is taking up a lot of really valuable resources, right? These are resources in terms of your own memory and also cognitive resources. And so that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about the prefrontal cortex being less active and less efficient in its ability to do exactly what that worker needs to do in order to prepare for their work cases, right? They need a functioning prefrontal cortex so they can organize all of their materials, so they can set the goals, set their priorities of their day. And yet, in the background, they have this overactive, hypervigilant amygdala, which is pulling all of those resources away, which can make it really, really challenging. And you talk about sleep at the kind of out at the beginning, right? Of like, oh, they didn't get enough sleep. They're already stressed. But that can then be cyclical because that means they will then also have disrupted sleep that evening. So it's this kind of continuing cycle.
Right. Well, I was going to kind of ask, and thank you both for that. I think that's really helpful and insightful, obviously. And I guess I was kind of wondering, in that scenario or scenarios like it, right? What could happen? Obviously, there's probably a lot that could happen before. What could also happen in that moment? And then what could happen after? So it's more like preventatively, actively in the moment during this high stress work environment. And then what needs to happen to kind of help repair neurologically after the fact so that, again, like, talking about the resilience factor, right? And so that like, does these stressful situations are going to continue to come up, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does somebody continue to build up their neurological resilience and rewire their brain more effectively so that they're able to handle things like these? And hopefully they improve their sleep, hopefully they improve their eating, etc. But are there other things that they could do to be a little bit more proactive? So kind of in those three separate stages, how would you approach that?
I mean, I think one thing to realize is that, when we talk about well-being versus ill-being, right? So this state of anxiety or depression, historically, they have been treated differently in research, right? And we study disease and we study these states of mind, like, depression, anxiety, and then we study well-being, right? And what's the effect of meditation on your brain? What's the effect of a good diet? And what we found in the last couple of decades is that those areas and those pathways and those mechanisms are the same, right? So the same pathways that break down when you have stress, when you have all these negative kind of stimuli, are the same pathways that are repaired when you eat well and sleep well, right? So, so you say, what else can we do aside from eating and sleeping? But I do think it's really important to go back to the basics and understand that our brains are part of our body. They're a biological component of our body. And the things that we, that your grandmother told you had to do, like sleep well and eat well and have friends that weren't toxic, these are the things that are helping repair your brain. And I think that when we focus too much on, some dietary supplement that I'm going to buy or some, novel treatment that's out there, we're pushing aside the basic thing, which is just go to bed. And sometimes that's not as easy, but fix your sleeping, right? Fix your diet, exercise more, things that are hard to do. They are very, very hard to do, especially when you are completely overloaded and overburdened at work. But for me personally, Dr. Scaplen and I, we are professors, and that is a very stressful job in a very different way. And it's, we have to actively take a pause and say, no, I will take a wellness day off. I have done that before. I have said, today, I have a lot of things to do, but you know what? I'm going to call in sick, and this is a mental health day because it matters. I matter. So I would just like to stress the importance of those basic things that are just difficult to do, but they will modulate the pathways and the mechanisms that are the same ones affecting us when we're under chronic stress.
Well, I think that's obviously pretty sound advice, right? Because I think a lot of us are looking for the silver bullet. We're looking for, what's the meditation? What's the grounding exercise? What's the Reiki thing I need to do? What's the massage I need to get? What's this and that? And I've kind of fallen down that rabbit hole myself too, where I'm like, and some of those things can be pretty helpful, right? But I just appreciate the fact that you just return to some of those basic things. Those are the most important things that are going to help you in long term in your mental health and fighting and combating stress. So
yeah, I agree. And I think we can actually talk about that, right? We can talk about mindfulness. We can talk about music therapy and all of these opportunities where they actually do, in fact, enhance emotional resilience, which is exactly what you're looking for. But I'd also like to refocus a little bit because we can talk about stress. And so far, we've talked about stress as being a bad thing, right? Stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. Stress calls us to action. Right? If we didn't have this increase in arousal, the stress response, we probably would not be prepared for that court case. So what's happening in the moment, regardless of whether or not I'm giving a talk at a conference or somebody is preparing themselves to present a case in front of a judge, you have an increase in stress hormone in your bloodstream. That's called cortisol. You also have an enhancement of that like norepinephrine, noradrenaline, which is like fight or flight, right? Are you going to walk into the courtroom or are you going to run the other direction, right? These are both viable options. And so the idea of like using that stress to prepare is actually a really good thing. Now, the issue is when that becomes chronic, right? You don't give your body an opportunity to recover from that stressful event where it can really start to build up, and then it can start really degrading some of these really important structures within our brain, like the prefrontal cortex, where you see actually a reduction, just like Dr. Heimer-McGinn talks about a reduction of cells within the hippocampus, you can also see a reduction of cells within the prefrontal cortex. So stress is not a bad thing. It calls us to act, it energizes us, it allows us to prepare. And, we develop strategies to deal with stress, right? So we know exactly what we need to talk about to make sure that that court case is actually successful. But then we also want to kind of regroup and then allow ourselves to decompress from that really stressful environment so that we're then aptly prepared for the next case. And that can look like a lot of different things for different people. Absolutely, sleep is important. As is social support. But as you say, mindfulness and even just a simple music therapy, listening to music for a moment to just reset your brain. Importantly, the music that you like, not music that somebody else tells you should listen to, can really help recenter individuals and prepare them for other future stressful environments.
I was going to ask if you had any music recommendations.
No, it's actually really important that you pick the music, in fact.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They do this across the board in terms of pain, right? using music to deal with chronic pain, to deal with trauma. And in those scenarios, what's absolutely essential is you pick the music that you find most settling.
Even if it's like death metal, it's as long as you choose it, it's okay. Okay.
Sometimes I need
That's
death
the most
metal.
important thing. Death metal. Yeah.
No, and I think, what Dr. Scaplen is talking about, we can almost separate it into two phases, right? One phase is the resilience portion of it. How do I go into the stressful environment? And that's kind of what you were talking about, the breakdown, the before, during, and after, right? The before is sleep well, eat well, exercise, have social interactions that are positive, right? The during is reducing the stress, right? Or at least how much that stress is impacting you, right? And so if you've come in with these resilience factors already, and you also take a beat, I do this myself in my office. I sometimes come in and I literally have 5 minutes between classes. And so I rush back to my office. I turn off all the lights. I lock the door and I set a 2-minute timer, just 2 minutes. And I sit down on my, comfy chair and I just close my eyes and I just listen to the sounds around me. That's all I do. I try to just eliminate. It's a form of meditation, you could say, but 2 minutes. And that's all I need to just recenter. And do that a couple of times a day. And, I think, like Dr. Scaplen said, finding the ways that work for you to just shut off for 2 seconds. There's this part of the brain called the default mode network, which is a collection of a lot of the areas that we've been talking about, actually includes the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. And it's this part of the brain that's basically, or the circuit that's supposed to be active when you're not doing anything, right? Default. And in a positive way, that's the part of your brain or circuit that allows you to daydream and to, think about things when you're just like pondering life. In reality, what that does is stress, right? In reality, we're hardly ever pondering the vacation we're going on. We're pondering all the stress and all the things that we have to do, and we're getting more and more and more anxious as the day goes by because we're thinking about all the things that need to happen. And so meditation, one of the many things that it does is it helps you to reduce the activity momentarily in that default mode network and just kind of just slow down the revolutions for 2 seconds. And that by itself can really help to kind of recenter and refocus to move on.
Yeah, I think to kind of build on that, the idea that every individual, we have a finite amount of mental energy and physical energy. So we can use that energy to prepare ourselves, but then we absolutely need an opportunity to reset so we can replenish those energy stores and be ready to fight our next battle.
One thing that I wanted to bring up, Stan, and I'm sorry if this is kind of taking the conversation in a different direction, is that there are sex differences in our response to stress. With many things in our bodies and our brains, men and women respond differently, and stress is no different. So, there are many things that can impact us when we're stressed out: our cognition, our kind of state of arousal. But for women, that tends to be more on the hyperarousal side. So the rumination, the agitation, the lack of concentration, the feeling on edge. And there have been experiments actually where they've, put somebody in an fMRI machine, showed them a picture of something quite aversive, like just something that this is really stressful to look at or to think about, as I can imagine that social workers would be put into that situation. And they see, a ramp up in the prefrontal cortex. They see the areas of the brain are involved in making adrenaline become overactive. And they see that more in women compared to men. Whereas men, also have that element. They tend to be a little bit more on the cognition side. So it tends to be a little bit more that things like working memory, right? Your ability to multitask, your ability to hold several things in your mind at the same time, verbal abilities, and other cognitive functions like attention. Those tend to be more affected in men. So I think it's also important to look at that kind of angle of it.
When we met to talk to prep for this, we talked about multitasking. So can you myth bust multitasking is a good idea or not a good idea? Myth or fact?
It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. Kristin, go on.
I mean, I think that we have a limited amount of kind of cognitive resources, right? And so the idea is, how are we going to use those cognitive resources? We want to focus our attention on one particular thing. When we're talking about focusing our attention or talking about working memory, we're really, again, talking about the prefrontal cortex. And as it turns out, the prefrontal cortex is really important for goal setting, for taking those goals and breaking it up into smaller, more reasonable actions, and switching between tasks. So as it turns out, we can do multiple things, right? But we often do one thing and then switch to another thing and then switch back and then switch back. So we're very good at switching between tasks, but we really are not very good at multitasking. What we tend to see is an overall decrease in performance when we're trying to multitask. And
Is
then
there
again, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, in that switching, is there a watering down of the quality of work and the performance and stuff too?
Well, again, consider that as you're multitasking, what you likely are also doing is monitoring the other things that you need to do.
Yeah.
Right? And that is also taking up cognitive resources. So those cognitive resources that are kind of monitoring what you still need to do is pulling away from what you're actually doing. So I would say the best thing to do is actually just create that list of all of the things that you need to do, and even set a timer to start the first thing. Focus your attention on that one thing. When the timer goes off, then absolutely switch to the next thing, but be present in that moment so you can be most productive. And I think even bringing this back to the context of chronic stress is really important, right? Because we're talking about the prefrontal cortex and how it is important in terms of deciding what our goals are and breaking those goals up into things that are actually more manageable, and this kind of, we'll call it task switching. Right. And if you see the prefrontal cortex decrease in activity as a result of chronic stress, ultimately decrease in size, it means that you're being less efficient at all of the things that you're doing, which is just kind of bringing home this idea of, again, ensuring that you are using your resources appropriately. You're focusing them. Don't try and do too much. Just kind of control what you can control in that moment. Is where you're going to get the best kind of output.
I like that task switching instead of multitasking, because multitasking does not exist. We don't do more than one task at a time, period. The brain does not work that way. But yes, we switch between tasks. So I love that. Fun fact about working memory, in your 30s and 40s, it starts declining. And this is seen in, people across the board, across cultures, across genders. So it's one thing to keep in mind, is that if you are attempting to task switch under a stressful environment, you are helping to overload those parts of your brain that are then going to lead to breakdown and burnout.
Well, it makes me think of the multiple tabs and windows open on your computer type thing too. It becomes overwhelming. And one thing that definitely gives me anxiety is when people, and I on my personal computer right now, and I have a lot of files that are on my desktop, and that just gives me anxiety. Too much going on. Can't focus.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I definitely do that thing that Kristin was talking about, where I will sit down for half an hour and I'm very disciplined, and I will say, this is my half hour to do blah. And I do that thing and I literally ignore everything else. But because I've made a list of all the things that I need to do, then I feel almost a little bit less anxious that I'm not thinking about those. It's not easy. Like it's not easy, right? We're always going to have in our brain like, oh, but I have to do all these other things. But if you've written them down, you can say, okay, in the next half hour, I'll get to those.
Right. I wanted to try to shift over to memory. So Dr. Scaplen, I don't know if I'm getting this pronunciation right, but what exactly is Drosophila melanogaster?
Yeah. Got a last
And
one.
why should we be paying attention to your research on how memories could potentially drive drug-seeking behavior or other maladaptive behaviors. As substance use is a, obviously big issue and concern for many families. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
I love it. So it's Drosophila melanogaster is how we affectionately call them in the lab and in the field. But in your kitchen, it's actually just the fruit fly. And I think it's actually a timely discussion, right? Because you can think about chronic stress, both within the context of the families that people are working with, but even coping strategies of chronic stress. Oftentimes people turn to things like substances, including alcohol. And so my focus has always been kind of understanding how the brain changes with experience. But as I said before, there are some changes in our brain that make for very, very strong memories, and others not so much. And in fact, memories for alcohol intoxication are those that are incredibly strong. And so the focus of my work is really trying to understand which neurons in the brain and also how they communicate, which neurons are important for forming those memories of experiences, especially in the context of alcohol intoxication. And how do those connections between those neurons, how does the conversations that they have with each other change across experience? And so many people are like, but wait, why the fruit fly, right? As it turns out, humans are not unique in their enjoyment of drinking alcohol and alcohol intoxication. This is consistent across many, many species. It's striking, actually. What you see in fruit flies, in fact, is initially their first couple experiences of drinking alcohol, they find that very aversive. They don't go back to the alcohol at all. But across multiple experiences, they develop these really enduring preferences where they're willing to run across electrified grids to get to cues, odor cues that are associated with intoxication. And I think that could probably be quite reminiscent to anyone that knows somebody struggling with addiction. Right? Often they continue to engage in drug-seeking behaviors despite some really aversive consequences. And so the questions are like, what's happening in the brain and how is the brain changing to create these memories? We think that this is actually very much like a memory disorder, right? Because you can think about one of the things that's really problematic about addiction is, people are struggle with dealing with drinking, et cetera, but then they want to stop, right? And they work really hard to stop drinking. And yet just, one cue is enough to trigger a craving. And now they're down the path of drug seeking again. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about memories that are really, really strong. Those memories for cues that trigger the cravings that are like, where is my next drink that I need to find? And what is really quite striking is that the connections in our brain, so you're not going to see a prefrontal cortex or a hippocampus or an amygdala in the fly brain. But in fact, you will find other circuits, other brain regions that perform similar functions. And the connections between those neurons are remarkably similar. And what the flies really offer is an opportunity to really dissect the circuit and understand how individual neurons contribute to the action. So we can really ask some very probing questions and answer those questions at a resolution that's just not achievable in other organisms.
So is the same being found in humans where even the initial experience or multiple initial experiences are averse or negative for intoxication, but they still end up going down this path? Is that similar in humans?
Yeah. And I think what's important to realize is that, these flies, they're not getting a sex on the beach, right? They're not getting like a pina colada. We're giving them a 95% alcohol. And so the taste, right? If you were to take a shot of vodka or even a shot of 200 proof alcohol, I would not recommend this at all. But there's a lot of alcohol is a really complex stimuli, right? There is the intoxication, which people do often find rewarding, but the smell and the burning sensation, those are all aversive qualities that people overcome in order to seek out that intoxication. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've all had that experience at some point, either with yourself or someone you know. Teenagers, when they try beer for the first time, they think it's gross, right? But they do it because there are social pressures. They do it because of the reward involved in it. And eventually, as an adult, you're like, oh yeah, I like an IPA, right? And you develop sort of a hedonic pleasure to it that wasn't there before, but it is there because you have these very strong memory formations that are sometimes able to even make you think that you like the taste of something.
Yeah, it's like your mind's playing tricks on you almost in a way is what it kind of sounds like.
Yeah.
It's changing your perception, right? And we do this across the board, right? Even as children, right? If you were to give a child a piece of broccoli at a young age, they would find that very aversive. They would not like the taste of it. It's very bitter. And yet, I love broccoli now, right? So your changes and your perceptions certainly evolve with experience. And of course, culture plays a huge role as well, right? In different cultures, there are different tastes that people really value, and others think, how in the world could you ever experience that? So I think experience is actually really a key player here in it shaping our perceptions and what we like and what we don't like.
And genetics too. I mean, genetics are involved in what we like, and they are also involved in our addictive tendencies. So there, as with any neuropsychiatric condition, from schizophrenia to bipolar to addiction, there have been studies showing that there are genes in common amongst people who have these very strong tendencies to become addicted to any substance, not only, alcoholic ones or narcotics. Sometimes we can be addicted to work. We can be addicted to gambling. There are many things that we can just be addictive towards. And there is a large part of that that's also genetic.
Yeah, it's actually quite striking. We share 60% of our genes with the fruit fly, and 75% of genes that have been implicated in disease were first discovered in the fruit fly. So, and it's a great point, actually. Not everyone that drinks alcohol develops alcohol use disorder. And so that's another actually really fascinating question. What are the individual differences between humans, also between flies, that allow flies to kind of continue and escalate their drinking versus not? And these are some really fascinating questions that some of my colleagues at Brown are studying currently.
So I have to ask, Kristin, do you have different flies that prefer different liquors?
So we only give them alcohol. We only give them ethanol. We've never kind of mixed it up in whiskey or tequila or anything like that. There's a lot of sugar in that, and that makes cleaning the apparatuses very difficult. So
yeah, I work with mice, and mice definitely have clear preferences for their rewards. I have one task where I reward them with Fruity Pebbles, and I had one mouse that liked only yellow Fruity Pebbles. So he would only do a cognitive task if we picked out all the yellow ones and gave him just those.
Wait, so that's actually really fascinating, because Fruity Pebbles and Fruit Loops, the taste of each one of those are remarkably similar, almost identical, and they're just distinguished by color alone, right? The same is true with Skittles. So that's actually a great experiment to continue. You should continue to investigate that.
And mice have reduced color perception, so it couldn't have been the color.
Well, it had to have been, actually, because it's yellow, and you could imagine yellow versus another. They could pick up those differences. Sorry.
We're going down a rabbit hole here.
So the flies aren't booking any flights to Napa anytime soon, or like Germany for Oktoberfest. I have no alcohol preferences. It's just straight up ethanol.
Anyone who's had wine on a summer evening knows that fruit flies like alcohol.
We're not, obviously, I'm sure there are some really interesting preferences that exist between flies and just their general preferences. All of those, wine especially, has a huge amount of sugar in it. And so absolutely, they would love to have that over my very clear 5% sucrose alcohol mixture. But I mean, I think it's actually just quite striking. So one of the reasons why we do it in this way, in fact, is when we're oftentimes when we are presenting them with alcohol, we want to make sure they're actually getting intoxicated. And so we vaporize this. And so ethanol.
How do you know they're intoxicated?
Great question. So we usually put them in a chamber, and we fill that chamber with an odor cue. And then we follow that for about 10 minutes or so. And then we follow that with a different odor cue with intoxicating doses of alcohol. So just like you can measure blood alcohol content in humans, you can actually measure alcohol content in flies as well. But they also follow the same kind of path of intoxication, right? So if somebody were to just have a drink, they might start to kind of, they will decrease their inhibitions. They'll become more social. They might get up and dance when they wouldn't otherwise. And then as they continue to drink, they'll get a little uncoordinated. They might fall or trip over themselves, and eventually they'll pass out. Flies go through that same process as well. So if you give them a little bit of alcohol, they become more social. They start courting flies. They're a little less choosy in the mates that they select. If you extend it even longer, they become a little uncoordinated. They might fall down and have a difficult time getting back up. And they also eventually sedate as well. So we can look at them behaviorally, like how are they behaving in that box to determine how intoxicated they might be. We can also look at their alcohol content, because there's actually some really fascinating work looking at the genetics of tolerance and escalation that is important to consider in those contexts.
Can you tell us a little bit about, maybe give us some hope in terms of the concept of neuroplasticity or neurological resilience? Many of us know that sort of the development begins to really slow down by the age of 25, but there is still neuroplasticity. What can we do to try to help individuals and families, especially, parents that are over the age of 25 and they're really struggling? And we'll just offer us some hope, I guess, in terms of neuroplasticity, and kind of maybe I actually was under the impression at one point that there was no more brain development after age of 25, but obviously there is some of that neuroplasticity.
Yeah, I think it's semantics. When we say development, usually in the field, what we mean is the building of something. And so obviously development stops at around 25 because you've built the system, you have the system, it's there. But it never stops changing. So right now, we are all learning things from each other. And the reason that you were able to remember that 5 minutes later is because there was a physical change in your brain. Your brain is now different than it was 5 minutes ago. So it's constantly changing, constantly on the move. Neurons are finding new connections to make. They're finding connections to get rid of because they're no longer relevant. In the part of your brain called the hippocampus, which is the memory portion, there's neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons. For a long time, we thought that adults couldn't make new neurons, and it turns out we can. It's just in very select portions of your brain. Luckily, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, all of those things that we talked about before, the diet, the sleeping, the exercise, we have been able to show in every single species, from Drosophila, fruit flies, to mice, to rats, to primates, to humans. What that does in your brain is it increases neurogenesis in the area of your brain that is so important that we've been talking about here for stress resilience. So not only was your grandmother correct, but there are decades and decades of research showing that you are able to form new memories and able to form new connections when you are taking physical care of your brain. I think for me, aside from that, there's a really important element, which is just visualization, right? I know this can sound a little bit kooky, right? But you have to see yourself in a situation, right? You have to believe that something is going to happen for you, or that you are a good person, or that, you can sleep for 8 hours. I'm going through it right now. I had knee surgery and I was very, active. I was running, I was bicycling, I was doing all these things, and now I can't, right? And just the importance of being in a state of mind where you accept to yourself that I will run again, I will cycle again, I will do all these things. Sure, I have to put in the time, right? I have to do my physical therapy, and I have to eat, and I have to do all these things. But without that key component of I can do this, it is a little bit harder for the brain to rewire. So that visualization, I think, is the state of mind portion that adds to everything else. So I think in a, in the context of social workers, I think it's important to believe that you deserve a break. I think is probably where this all starts. Believe that you can find peace. Believe that you are helping the people that you are helping, that there is positive outcomes everywhere you look. It's just that sometimes the burnout is real and it's really easy to focus on the negatives. But focusing on the positives, aside with all the other self-care things, can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, I would also say that, our brains are uniquely personalized to ourselves, right? And we think about like the brain stops developing. What we really mean in that context is that you see a lot of insulating connections that are really important happening within those kind of like teenage years up through age 25 or so. But that again does not mean that your brain doesn't continue to personalize itself based off of your own experiences. And also with age, right? So earlier, Victoria mentioned that your working memory starts to decrease, but that is not the end, right? Because what you do is you build up on your own personal experiences and basically your lifetime of memories to rely on. So the brain is incredibly redundant. It's incredibly personalized, and it is perfectly built so that you can be successful. And the goal is just to make sure you're allocating your resources in a way that's healthy for you as an individual and healthy for the tasks that you have set out to accomplish.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the visualization piece too, because we've done a training before on a growth mindset and challenging your fixed mindset with a growth mindset and really thinking about like changing the way that you think in terms of being able to shift the paradigm for yourself and thinking that, you're not done learning, you're not done experiencing things. You can still change, you can still learn something. It might be a little bit harder as you get older, but you can still do these things. You still can grow. The brain still has the ability to have that neuroplasticity element to it and continue to grow and continue to learn. And you're not just done when you reach a certain age, right? Then that's it. I think a lot of people do get resigned to the fact that I'll never be able to do that, or I'll never be able to. And there are certain limitations, obviously, but I think we have a lot of work to do for ourselves and being able to be more open that we can change and we can grow more. So,
and I'll add another positive perspective to aging, because we always tend to focus on the things that go when we age.
yeah,
But in fact, there are some cognitive processes that improve with age. So language is one of those, right? Anything that requires you to build on something, the more you learn, the more you experience, the richer vocabulary you will have, the better you will be at self-awareness, which is also a type of cognition, right? Your ability to understand and regulate your emotions, that increases with time. Your powers of induction, right? Of being able to look at many different parts of a puzzle and be able to put that puzzle together. That is something that also increases with age. And, that's what we call the wisdom of old age, right? The wisdom of old age is kind of all of those things put together. So not all is bleak and terrible as we age. We also get smarter in some things.
That's a focus on the negative that a lot of people have a challenge getting over, right? All the things they're losing. And I remember when you said grandparent, right? My grandfather always said, don't get old, don't get old, don't get old. And it's like, there's so many things that he had, all these other things to offer. So yeah.
Exactly.
I know we're like a little bit over, but do you guys want to just do a quick plug for brainwaves and just tell us a little bit about brainwaves and the, why you found it so important and all the great work you're doing and raising public awareness of the brain and neuroscience?
Sure. Yeah. So Dr. Scaplen and I have been involved for many years doing outreach to the community. This neuroscience that we're talking about here, we teach it in the classroom, we teach it in the labs. But I think it is so important for everybody to understand what's happening in their brains and to make that science that we know accessible to people. So we have an organization called Brainwaves Rhode Island, where we go into the community, we go into schools, community centers, libraries, and we basically bring education about the brain. We tailor it to any scenario. So wherever we are, the concerns that they have and the questions that they have about the brain, we will sit down and talk about it. We also have educational materials. So we have real human brains that we bring out to events so people can see and touch and ask questions. Dr. Scaplen has a program that she runs where she brings EEG, so the devices that can measure the brain waves in your brain, and she takes those to high schools and teaches students basically how to think about conceptualizing a research question and how to go about answering that research question in a scientific, evidence-based way. So we invite you to take a look at our website or any of our social media platforms. It's Brainwaves RI, and call us out because we were happy to go anywhere within a reasonable distance of Providence and the surrounding areas.
Brainwavesri.org. Is that the website or
Yes.
Well, thank you both so much. We appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. Any final thoughts?
Sleep, eat, exercise, get together with your friends.
Get back to the basics.
Get back to the basics. They're not easy.
Offer up some hope. Yeah. Well, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.